What is going on, everybody, and welcome to a Halloween horror comic roundtable here on the Indie Inkwell. My name is JJ, one of your two co-hosts. My co-host, as always, with me today is Michael, aka Longbox Entertainment. I don't think we need to sit here and bullcrap for a minute. Let's just get everybody in here. We've got Kyle Goodman, the writer and creator of Here Walks Monsters, with us today. We've got Eric Williamson, writer and creator of a whole bunch of stuff. We'll get into some examples here shortly. And then we've got Jon McCarthy, who is basically like taking over Blood Moon Comics at the moment.
No, I don't know about that.
How's everybody doing, man?
Great.
Oh, just another glorious day in paradise.
It's beautiful.
And hey, thank you guys for considering us. I think all for inclusion on this. This is pretty awesome.
Oh yeah.
Well, we started thinking horror, and we're like, who are some of the people that we've had on the show before who focus on that? And your guys' names popped up immediately. So
it has been a top agenda lately. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Spooky season is upon us.
So for those folks who may not have seen each of your guys' individual episodes, why don't we real quick at least introduce you guys? Kind of how long have you guys been doing this? Why do you, I'm sorry, why blah, 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 blah.
Talking is
no
hard.
pressure. No pressure.
Talking is hard. Kyle, how did you get into comic books and why horror? And tell us a quick little bit about Here Walks Monsters.
Okay, well, let's see. I've been reading and collecting comics for over 30 years at this point. I got in very early with kind of what got me to read. I focus primarily right now. My first book is Here Walks Monsters. It's a zombie infected story set in a world very similar to ours. It is my first genre that I'm going into, but it's definitely one of my favorites because, in my opinion, horror is one of the last free, open frontiers where you can tell an honest to goodness story and not have to worry about people getting upset with things that happen in the book. So that's where I went. That's where I went horror first. I think it's like it's at the last frontier when it comes to the true storytelling that we have nowadays.
True.
100%. I guess we'll just kind of keep going actually it's clockwise, isn't it? Yeah, clockwise here. We'll go Jon McCarthy. You're up next, man.
Yeah, I think very similar. I mean, I've been in comics since I was a little kid. You know, it was growing up, you didn't have a whole lot of, disposable income back in the day. Comics were always a great place to kind of escape into the stories, that were available to you for cheap and let you kind of go off into another land. I've also, probably around the same time since I was little, I was been a big horror fan. I always tell the story. In hindsight, I was lucky. My mom was 16 years old when I was born. So when I started getting into, the elementary school age, she was still too young, I think, to know that it was probably inappropriate. So, and growing up, I was born in 1972, so I'm an old guy. But the awesome part about that is probably the best horror movies of all time came out in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. So I was watching those at ages where I really shouldn't have been probably watching them. But, now I've kind of reversed my stance because now I kind of look at horror as, from my early experiences on it, the first one that always comes to mind for me was watching The Exorcist, probably at like fucking 6 years old, 7 maybe, and being like, what?
Wow. Yeah, I can only imagine watching The Exorcist at 6 or 7 years old. I probably wouldn't have slept for a month.
Well, you don't sleep for it for a month, but I've been having this conversation recently where, looking back on my own experience with it, I find that, and I believe that, when you watch something scary as a kid like that's something that has no real chance of actually harming you, it kickstarts something in your imagination, right? So you can't imagine a monster under your bed or in your closet that's actually scary without, because it's not there. But in your mind, you start creating this narrative and you can visualize this thing. So now I'm of the belief that it's actually probably a good thing to expose kids to horror stories when they're younger, because of that reason. There's no chance it's going to hurt them. That's not going to like psychologically damage you. I mean, I didn't grow up to be a psychopath, I guess, technically, but and so now I like. I've always been a fan of the genre, and when I started doing comics, or even any story that I've ever written, I always find that if you can do something suspenseful and try to do something kind of scary, it's a lot of fun. And the challenge for me with comics is it's unlike film. It becomes a lot more difficult because you don't have a lot of the things at your disposal that a live action storytelling has. You don't have music, and you don't have, the big things that are there. So you really have to rely on story and character development, to make people care about your characters in a very short amount of time to hook them into a comic book. So it's kind of all of those things combined. And, I write, even, recently I started taking on a superhero story. People had asked me a while back, if you ever had any desire to write a superhero comic? And I was like, no, not really, because it's never really, anything's ever called to me. But then I had this really cool idea and I started writing it. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of horror elements into it, just because it's the tools that come with telling stories in that world are freaking awesome. And I just love them, man,
Cool.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to do a jump scare on a panel they can just close.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, you got that page turn. You know what I'm saying?
Hey,
that page turn.
The page turn is all you've got, really. The page
It
turn
can only do so much. It's like
and
putting me in heels. It's like, it can only help but so much.
You have to make people care about the characters before you start doing terrible things to them. And then, you have to use what's at your disposal, which is really only your page turns in comics. So it's a very unique medium to try to tackle this genre in, I think.
All right. Well, Eric, you are last up. Give us your intro and a little bit about your work and love of horror real fast.
Sure. Well, my name is Eric Williamson. I am a poet, author, comic book creator who really has a deep love affair, fascination with all things horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, and they all sort of weave interchangeably in my works. Most notably, recently, I just finished up a sort of side project called Grimnight Room, which is an homage to the 1947 children's book Goodnight Moon that many of us, especially I assume John, since we're right around the same age, grew up being read as young kids and then went on to read to our kids. And I wanted to take the in an homage, but also sort of a satirical parody fashion of taking this beloved children's story and just turning it into something that's truly horrific, and yet at the same time laced in with just some incredibly beautiful stylistic art treatment.
I love that.
And also sort of lean into sort of my poetry roots with sort of rhyming couplets to kind of keep that nice syncopated momentum that Goodnight Moon has when it's being read to you as a children's bedtime story. And I'm sort of dubbing this as a twisted children's bedtime story for adults. And so far, it seems seemingly pretty well received. And it was my first actual comic that I produced, comic/illustrated children's book, I guess, that I produced as a hardcover and as a trade paperback, which is really kind of cool.
Oh, nice.
That's awesome. I want to check that out, really.
A little bit. What is also really fascinating to me is, and I have a love of the blend of horror and sci-fi. And JJ, we talked about this last time, was this project I have called When We Were the Voyage, which is this edge of my goal or my objective is to take horror and sci-fi blend in a comic book format to 11, to take you to the edge of sanity and then ask you as the reader to jump off, right? And to go as far as you possibly can withstand with psychological dread, cosmic horror elements, as well as extreme body horror and just a visceral toxicity that just makes you want to vomit when you're reading it.
It will make you uncomfortable.
Really
See, but why does that sound so beautiful to me? Like,
it sounds. I agreed, Kyle.
like,
Yes.
I'm sitting here, I'm just like, oh, like
Yeah.
that sounds
Sounds like
delightful.
Eric's
Like-
description of when we were in a voyage. It's like a lullaby.
Kyle sitting here daydreaming, falling asleep.
on this pathway, JJ, to putting out this graphic novel, which is forthcoming, we did the ash can last time I was on your show, and we talked about sort of the inception to see if we can dangle a carrot and get a taste test if there's an audience for this extremely reviling narrative in an illustrated novel format. So marrying the best parts of comic book illustrative storytelling with narrative horror book reading and smashing those together. Well, we then went on to do a few standalones to kind of supplant and supplement the universe that we're building. And so Grimnight Room, even though it is its own standalone, even though it's its own standalone project, it also has a few little Easter egg drops that tie it into that overarching narrative of my other works. And I really love doing that. I really love leaving little breadcrumbs and Easter eggs in all of my different works that interconnect and tie people that ultimately might like me as a creator, to reward them for being loyal and also for digging deeper than they might with just any other like Marvel, DC comic or whatever rag that they pick up at the comic book store. And so that's been really fun, and long way to drive the store to find out it's closed, I suppose, but that's my
It's elevated, y'all. Okay.
No, I love that, dude. I'm with you on that.
Absolutely.
I do the same stuff. I always try to make stuff so that when people are invested in your stories, that there's a bit of familiarity there and things that kind of can lead them back to the stuff you've done before in case they'd missed it. Yeah, that's really a nice way of telling stories, I think.
Well, and it's also really rewarding.
Yeah.
So in a story I had done called The Last Pixel, I did a few lines in like binary, right? And then I've also used Braille, and I've used either other languages or either visual cues or elements that tie into those other books. And I've heard feedback from readers like, wow, that was so cool to find that hidden message.
I like that, yeah.
And or that was such a pain in the ass, Eric. I had to go figure out how to translate Braille on the internet for your stupid comic book. But then when I saw the message, I was like, that's so rad. And
so that just makes it worth it, though. That makes
it
an experience and less of something you're just looking at.
Yeah.
Yep.
I also think that shows like an upper level of planning as well. Like it's not just a comic book. This is something that like I know like, some people who aren't like big into comic books, they think comic book, they think, oh, it's a picture book for adults. But so much more goes into creating these stories and a lot of times these worlds and universes, and having those Easter eggs or things that can call back 20 issues down the road or from a different project. It just shows that extra love and care and like really trying to make it special. And I think that's where a lot of us indie creators are focusing so much, because we are the same people reading the books, just not maybe ours. So like we try to give our readers something that we would absolutely love to like see ourselves. Like me, I haven't put anything like that, but I put a little breadcrumbs in issue 1, to try to like drop some hints of what might come in the future.
Well,
But
Kyle,
one of
it's
the
a really
beautiful
great point. It's a really great point, because you are